superheroes. I'm Pink Phoenix, coming to you from Purdue University's College of Veterinary Medicine with VetaHumanz Live, and our special guest, General Health. General Health's a physician, and today we're going to talk about why it's so important for physicians and vets to work together to help keep everybody healthy. Thanks so much for being on the show.
I am so glad to be here with you today, Pink Phoenix. General Health here, but right now I'm in my alter ego as the former Surgeon General of the United States. So I don't have my cape today, but I do have it with me when I'm out there promoting health, and hopefully you'll get to see the picture.
All right. Before we get to the tough questions, can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well, I actually grew up in rural southern Maryland on an old farm, and I had really severe asthma when I was younger. One of the things that I most remember about being young was that I always wanted to have a pet. I always wanted to have a dog or a cat, but I was really allergic to cat hair. And for our dogs, we were able to at least get an outside dog and keep a dog outside. But a lot of I think benefits from having animals around. My dog Bruno was my buddy growing up, and I think I learned a lot from him, and hopefully he learns a few things from me. But grew up in that area, and then had the good fortune of going to another Big Ten school, University of Maryland, not Purdue, but now a Big Ten school. And got interested in pursuing medicine. And so I went to medical school at Indiana University. I was making my way slowly to Purdue, and got my medical degree there before becoming Indiana State Health Commissioner and then Surgeon General of the United States. And now I'm here at Purdue University, and couldn't be happier. Couldn't be happier to be part of the League of VetaHumanz, and to be promoting health, particularly One Health, the concept that we're all interconnected, humans, animals, the environment, everything impacts our ability to be healthy.
I love your story, and I think it's really cool. We both grew up in Maryland. We both came to Indiana to go to medical school. And then, you became a physician and the Surgeon General of the United States. And I became a hog vet hosting a podcast that you're on. Life is wild. I love it. So you told us a little bit about what One Health means to you. Why do you think it's so important for physicians and veterinarians to work together?
Well, one of the things that people don't know about the Surgeon General of the United States is that when I'm not on TV, when I'm not out there telling people not to smoke, or many of the other things people associate with the office of the Surgeon General, that I am actually the operational head of the Public Health Service, the United States Public Health Service Commission Corp. And that is a group of 6,000 uniformed officers whose mission is to promote, protect, and advance the health and safety of our nation. And that's our overall mission. But under the Surgeon General, you have doctors, nurses, pharmacists, veterinarians, dentists, engineers, therapists. There are many different people who have to come together. So the Public Health Service, as much as anyone, really believes in and promotes One Health. We believe that you have to have all these things coming together to protect the public's health. And so one of the things that I try to help people understand is that we're all part of a team. We all have to do our part. And I learned this, for instance, when I first became Surgeon General. We had 3 Category 5 hurricanes barreling down on us, and they hit mostly the southern U.S., Florida, Texas, but the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. And I flew to the U.S. Virgin Islands and to Puerto Rico to do a tour, and the island was just devastated. I mean, completely devastated. But when we were going around the island, the needs, quite honestly, weren't medical needs. I was a doctor, and there weren't a lot of acute medical needs. The needs were, hey, what do we do with our injured pets? Or what do we do with all these stray animals now? Because people had to leave the island and abandon their pets? What do we do with food that's been sitting out and that hasn't been properly cooled? What do we do with a lot of the mental health issues? It really was One Health personified, and it really showed the need to have all these different players at the table, just like a superhero team. Everyone's got their different strengths, their different powers that they bring to bear to fight towards a common goal.
That's an excellent example, and it just must be so amazing to lead a team like that.
It really was. It was a lot of fun. And we have chief professional officers in every category. And so I got to know those folks really well. And I got to call on them. So my own dog, her name is Bella, got bitten by a snake when we were out in Maryland, because Maryland has more poisonous snakes than what Indiana does. And she ended up going to the hospital, and I ended up having to call the chief veterinary officer emergently one weekend to help us really navigate that difficult time for our family. Bella almost didn't make it. She was in the ICU, and we thought we were going to have to put her to sleep. But fortunately, I had access to a veterinarian who was able to help us understand and think through the proper care pathway for her. And I will tell you, again, that's another example of One Health, because it was Bella's health that was at stake, but my kids were devastated. Their mental health was impacted. It really impacted our entire family with what she was going through. And she made it through. So Bella's actually upstairs now barking. You might hear in the background. And she's got some more gray hairs for the experience, but she's still doing just fine. And again, my family is in a much better place for it. We know that having pets and having animals, not just pets, but animals around you, can help lower your cortisol levels, lower your stress levels, can be a companion that actually lowers people's chances of suicidality or of substance misuse. So again, and like I say, not just pets, going out and having and riding a horse, stroking an animal, being able to engage with other animals really is calming. It's soothing for us.
Yeah, the human-animal bond is so strong. I'm glad Bella's okay, and maybe she can be the guest on our next podcast.
Well, I know she would love it.
Bring her down.
Just like many people's pets, Bella thinks that she's a human. and so she would sit right in my lap and look in the camera and try to interact with you.
That would be great. Well, one thing I love about how you do your job is you're so engaged with the communities that you serve. So my question is, if you were in charge of the universe, it's actually two questions. What 3 things would you ask people to do to help get the pandemic under control? And how can we address the most common barriers the people are facing that prevent them from doing these things?
Well, those are great questions. I don't know if I'll get to 3 or if I'll have more than 3, but let me get started. I think the first thing that I would do is take the politics out of all of the discussions. So, honest truth, we got a double whammy last year. We had a once in a century pandemic, and we had an incredibly divisive presidential election. And no matter which candidate you were for, or maybe you were for neither candidate, it's hard to deny that it was a divisive presidential election. And a lot of the debate that we were having about health really was being had through a inherently political lens. What do I mean? If I say you should wear a mask, or if I say you shouldn't wear a mask, inherently you start to think, oh, that person must be a Republican or that person must be a Democrat, versus thinking, what are the reasons, the scientific reasons behind why that person feels that way? If I say I'm pro-vaccine or no one should be made to get a vaccine, again, you start to fall into these political framings versus scientific framings. And what's the lesson there? So I'm going to answer the second question now. How do we overcome that? We know that politicians speaking on these issues really lower people's trust in science. What we need are trusted people within the community talking about these issues. And who better than a veterinarian to go out there and explain the science behind vaccinations and help people understand, hey, you bring your dog in. We actually just took Bella, our dog, to go get her vaccines updated last week. So who better than a veterinarian to say, here's why we're giving Bella vaccinations, and to teach young people and old people about how we develop vaccines and the science behind them and how they keep us all safe. You can't take your dog to the kennel if you when you're going out of town if you don't have proper vaccinations. That's not to protect your dog. That's to protect the other people in the kennel. So we even know about, the whole concept of herd immunity comes from the animal world. So I think one way that we help overcome these challenges is by having experts, people who were trained as veterinarians, as doctors, as pharmacists, as nurses in the community talking about these issues instead of politicians talking about them. I think we need to educate people about some of the things that have come up during this pandemic, not just vaccinations, but just about how to critically look at data, how to understand, okay, this study came out. How do I interpret it for my life? How do I apply it in real life? What does it mean when a study comes out and says masking lowers the rate of transmission, or when a study comes out and says this new medication may help you, or this new medication has been proven not to help you? And I don't want to get, again, political here. I can say one word and people will immediately start thinking politics again: ivermectin. But I say it because we're on a veterinary podcast, and this is a medication that veterinarians use and know about, an antiparasitic. Well, who better than veterinarians to go out there and explain to people, look, there are indications to use different medications for animals and humans, and we use them in a scenario where we feel like the benefit exceeds the risk, and to help walk people through that in a very non-confrontational, non-heated, non-political format. I think that other things we need to do, and I'm going to get a little bit non-scientific here. I think we just need to care for one another. I think there hasn't been enough caring throughout this pandemic for one another. We've really, unfortunately, fallen into this. It's all about me. It's all about what I want to do, and not really thinking about, okay, what is the impact that my actions have on the broader community? And again, I go back to the fact that you can't take your animal to the kennel or to the dog park or around other animals without having a reasonable assurance that they're not going to harm those other animals. So why don't we hold ourselves to that same standard when we're going into a public setting? And it's not to say that I'm advocating for or against any particular intervention, but the general concept that, hey, let's sit back and think that this is about more than just me. It's about protecting those around me so that we can have a civil and a functioning society. The final point I'd make, and again, this ties back into veterinary science, is that this is a positive. I want to remind people that we are really at a remarkable time scientifically. We're seeing science happen in real time. And we've had 3 vaccines developed. We've had multiple therapeutics developed. We've had testing stood up. And all of these things have happened in record time. And that is great. And so what we need to do is take the good, the positives that have come from the last several years of the pandemic, and figure out how can we scale those positives up to increase drug development in the future. Maybe we'll come up with cures for cancer more quickly, or a vaccine for HIV because of it. We remember that a lot of these diseases, including COVID, including Ebola, including HIV, have had animal origins. Including Zika. And so how can we look at One Health and really look at what happened during the pandemic to figure out how we can more quickly identify these diseases in the future, and more quickly come up with tests and therapeutics, and if necessary, vaccines to prevent them moving forward? It's again by embracing a One Health approach.
Absolutely. Oh, such excellent examples. Thank you for those. So you are still practicing as a physician. Oh, as you see patients, what are the most common concerns that you hear about from your patients about being vaccinated or boosted?
Oh, so I thought you were going to ask what are the most common concerns I see in my patients, and I was going to say, well, I'm going to answer the question I thought you were going to ask first anyway, because I think it's important because it's a problem that we also see in animals. The biggest problem, no pun intended, is obesity. And what's interesting is we're seeing obesity in humans. We're also seeing obesity in animals now, as we are in a world
Absolutely.
where there's more excess and where both people and animals are eating foods that are worse for you. We take our food and we order our fries from McDonald's and we give a fry to the dog. Well, that's not good for us or good for the dog. And so we need to really understand the importance of good nutrition because it increases your risk for all sorts of diseases, for cancer, for cardiovascular disease, for diabetes, and actually one of the top risk factors for being hospitalized and or dying from COVID is being obese. So if you want you to be healthier, your family to be healthier, your pets to be healthier, then we need to pay more attention to the food and the products that we're putting in our body. And we need to create more opportunities for people to make healthy choices because, again, I frame it through the lens initially of choices, but we have to understand that the choices people make are 100% dependent on the choices that they have. And more people need the opportunity to make healthy choices. My dog, I have two. Bella has a little sister now who we just got over Christmas named Ruby, but they love lettuce and they love apples. And so instead of giving our dogs treats that are unhealthy for them, we give them healthy treats, and then my kids can eat the apples. They won't eat the lettuce along with the dogs, but the dogs love lettuce, I think because it's crunchy. They'll eat the lettuce and they'll eat the apples, and we're all engaging in good health.
I want to go with this. So we talk about this, and this is so important because it's all about mitigating risk, and we talk about making healthy choices in people and animals. We also have to think about health disparities, and not everybody has the access to make those choices.
Exactly. So I am actually the director of health equity initiatives at Purdue University. And I have to almost always start off with explaining to people what equity is. And equity really means people getting what they need versus equality being people getting the same thing. So let me give you a real example. If a person is using a wheelchair, they may need a ramp to get in and out of a building. If a person is not using a wheelchair, they don't need the ramp. So giving everyone the same thing, either no ramp, means that you're disadvantaging someone who needs a wheelchair to get in and out of a building, or giving everyone a ramp means that you're actually misusing resources to give some people things that they don't need, doesn't get you to where you need to be. So equality is important in many instances, but it's not enough. Equity is giving that person who's using a wheelchair a ramp to get in and out of their home, giving that person who doesn't need a wheelchair another means to get in and out. And it may mean making sure that you're making the stairs readily available for someone who's at risk for obesity so that they have more opportunities to exercise so that they can be healthy. So it's really about giving everyone the opportunities to be healthy. And I often like to tell a story about my daughter. My daughter likes to spend a little bit too much time on these things. And so whenever she wants to is on her phone too much, I tell her to go outside and ride her bike, go outside and exercise. And I can do that because I live in a neighborhood where we know all of our neighbors, where we have complete streets and sidewalks, and where she can safely, as a 12-year-old, go out and disappear from her family, from her dad for 15, 30, 45 minutes at a time without us worrying that something bad is happening to her. If I were to go just 10 miles away to downtown Indianapolis from where I live and do the same thing, I would be a bad dad. I'd be a negligent dad because these aren't communities that have complete streets. These aren't communities that are safe. for someone to go out. It's certainly not a place you tell your 12-year-old daughter, go out and I don't want to see you for 20 or 30 minutes, because then all sorts of untoward things could happen. And the point of that is that not everyone has the same opportunity to make healthy choices. And we want to ensure that more people have that opportunity to eat right, to exercise, to sleep, to make those healthy choices, because we've made them the easier choices for them to go down, the easier pathways. Another example, I talked about the apples and the lettuce that I love to give to my dog and that we love to eat too, that I love to give to my kids. Well, why is it that a bag of apples is more expensive than a bag of French fries at the store? If you don't have money and you're just trying to make ends meet, then you're in many cases forced into making an unhealthy choice, because the unhealthy choice is the less expensive choice. It makes your money go further, even though it puts your health at risk in the long run. We've got to do more to ensure, again, healthy choices are available for everybody.
Absolutely. All right, let's go back to the vaccination question. What are some concerns that people have about being vaccinated that might not be related to the science of the vaccine at all, just the situation they're in?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that a lot of people in this country have legitimate reasons to be concerned, fearful of, distrustful of the government and of the medical system. When you look at the infamous Tuskegee experiments that took place in our country, where back in the 1930s, the federal government, led by the Office of the Surgeon General, the office that I was in just a few years ago, denied Black men treatment for syphilis because they wanted to see how it would play out in them over many years, over decades. And so this went on for 70 years. They denied these people treatment and watched them suffer and watched their families suffer. And even after they stopped the experiment 70 years later, it then took several more decades for them to apologize for these horrific experiments. And so we can't expect that someone is going to then immediately trust the government when we say, or the scientific community when we say, we've got this new vaccine, we want you to take it. Much less we're going to make you take it. And even in 2 years isn't enough time to overcome decades, over a half a century, closer to a century of mistrust. That's just one example.
Yeah.
Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks is another famous example of a woman whose cells were used without her permission for scientific experiments. And they're now what are used to produce many more of our medications today. Those original HeLa cells. HeLa means Henrietta, is an abbreviation for Henrietta Lacks. So HeLa cells are used to generate new medications, but many of the medications we use were generated from experiments using cells that were essentially stolen from someone who was subjected to whose tissues were subjected to medical experimentation without her permission. And so lots of historical reasons for mistrust that we have to first acknowledge. And what I do with people is explain to them, look, we have institutional review boards. We have a FDA process with independent people on an advisory committee. We have many different checks and balances in place now to make sure these horrific things don't happen again. So we have to start with that. But people also feel like the vaccines were developed too quickly. And so I take a lot of time oftentimes explaining to folks that there were no corners cut from a scientific perspective. It was a lot of red tape that was cut. There's a lot of regulatory red tape that occurs. And it also, quite frankly, is just not cost effective for many drug companies to take multiple steps at the same time, because if the drug doesn't pan out, they've wasted tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, in this case, the federal government said, we're going to pay you up front for these drugs, whether or not they make it to market. And what people don't know is there were actually 8 or 9 different candidates that we had fully paid for in the hopes that we get one over over the finish line. We were fortunate to get 3 over the finish line, but that was because we provided the funding to be able to work faster, to hire more people, to build up the equipment, and to do multiple steps at once. And that was without cutting any corners in the process. It was just working more, having more money to work faster. At the same time. And then people also will say, well, these medications, vaccines haven't been tested long enough. I have to explain to them that in the history of vaccines, almost no one exhibits side effects more than a few weeks out from the vaccine. So it's not like a drug that you take and you may not see the negative outcomes of it for years down the road. With vaccines, all vaccines, if you're going to have a side effect, you're going to have it pretty early on. And we've been studying these vaccines for well over 2 years now, and we've got hundreds of millions of people who've been vaccinated. Hundreds of millions, billions of people worldwide who've been vaccinated. So if there were a safety issue, we would see it now, a major safety issue. And so I want people to understand these vaccines are safe. These vaccines are incredibly effective. No corners were cut. And I finished by telling people I'm vaccinated and boosted. My wife is vaccinated and boosted. My 2 boys are vaccinated and boosted. And my daughter, who's not eligible for a booster yet, is fully vaccinated. So I'm not just telling you to do something because I want you to listen to me. I'm telling you to do, I'm advising you to do something because it's what I have chosen to do as a doctor to protect me and my family.
Excellent advice. Thank you for that. How have you, in your position as U.S. Surgeon General, in your position in your personal life, how do you navigate differences in opinions that people have about these methods of controlling the pandemic?
That is a great question. And one of my favorite sayings is that people need to know that you care before they care what you know. So you start off by listening. There's a saying that we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You're supposed to listen twice as much as you speak. And I start off by listening to folks and hearing their concerns. And when you hear out their concerns, in many ways, you can find alignment between what you're asking people to do and what they want to do. So someone may say, for instance, look, I want my kids to play sports again. And then I can point out, well, there are other countries that have much higher vaccination rates and much higher adherence rates to public health measures that are more open than what we are because they've been able to control the virus. Hearing people out, I think, is appropriate. There are many people who've expressed concerns to me, even in the healthcare fields, about whether or not the vaccines impact their ability to have children, their fertility. And when you hear someone out and you hear those concerns, who am I to say that someone who wants to get pregnant is wrong for asking that question? You're not wrong for asking that question. You validate it and you say that is a very reasonable concern that you have. What you should know is that we've actually done studies, many studies, that show that your risk of having fertility problems are much higher if you get COVID than if you get the vaccine. And that there has actually been shown to be no increase in miscarriages or fertility issues if you get the vaccine, but definite increases if you get COVID. But it starts out by listening. That same person who, if you just heard them say, I'm not getting the vaccine, and you react and say, well, you're crazy, or whatever pejorative term you want to throw out there, that doesn't engage them. That dismisses them. It builds mistrust, and it actually pushes them away. But the way I respond is to say, okay, well, tell me why you feel that way. And then we can have an honest conversation and a compassionate and empathetic conversation about the real reasons people have hesitancy. And I found that when you take that approach, I'm often able to have success in helping people get to a place where they're more comfortable being vaccinated.
I love that. And that circles right back around on why it's so important for you using your strategy and all of us to get in the community and listen to each other and support each other and care about each other and really understand the concerns, because they are all valid.
Exactly. Exactly. And I tell people all the time, you should never be ashamed and you should never be shamed for asking questions. But what we don't want to do is let misinformation cause us to make a poor decision for our health or our family's health or our community's health. So find someone you trust. Find someone in your community. And again, it could be your doctor, your nurse, your local pharmacist, your local veterinarian, your local dentist. Find someone who has some scientific knowledge, and some training, and ask them, how do you think through these complicated issues? What are the sources that you go to for information? And then that is a way, I think, to help you feel comfortable that you're getting unbiased facts, that you're not getting information from someone who has a political agenda or some other agenda.
So I know that we have listeners out there who want to be veterinarians, but not all of them want to be veterinarians. Some of them, I imagine, want to be physicians. So can you describe the moment when you knew that you absolutely were going to be a physician?
That is a great question. And I'd love to tell you it was an epiphany, but it was something that I actually came around to very gradually, very slowly. I loved science. I love STEM. And so I actually think that of the folks out there, a lot of people do believe that it's this magic moment and you all of a sudden know. But in most cases, people I advise, that's not the way it works. It's that you have an interest in science. You love learning. That's incredibly important. And you got to learn, you got to decide, okay, do I like machines? And I go down the engineering pathway. And I actually started off majoring in engineering. Do I like machines and stuff, or do I like to work with live things? And in that case, you might go down the veterinary or traditional physician or dentistry route. And if you choose to go down the working with live animals route, then you've got to figure out which animals do you like to work with, the kind that talk, or the kind that cuddle, and are furry. And then you got to figure out, okay, within that category, is there a particular body part that I like to work with more than others, or a particular subtype? So you work with hogs, and so I think it's just really about in the beginning figuring out broadly where are my passions, and then kind of trying different areas out. So one of the things that folks can do at Purdue, which I love, is students can come on campus during the summer and try out different things through different programs, take different tours in different facilities, and see what it's like to be a veterinarian on a daily basis, or to be a nurse, or to be an engineer. And I think that that's something that I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to do when I was younger, was go to different campuses during the summer. I went to an actuarial camp one summer. For those of you who aren't aware, actuarial science is a whole lot of math. Actuarians are the people who figure out your insurance rates, and they have to take 10 different exams in order to be certified as an actuary. And I did a camp during the summer, and I didn't hate it, but I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing it. And so I was like, okay, I like math, but I don't like math that much. So what else can I do within the STEM fields that kind of scratches my itch? That's what I would recommend to people. And like I said, I started off in engineering. I actually did a research project during a summer when I was in Holland with a gentleman who was an MD PhD. And in his lab, he was doing some engineering work. And so that's why I was with him. But I got to follow him around as he did his hospital rounds. And I was like, that's pretty cool. I actually think I like that. And so it was through an exposure that was almost accidental that I got to see what it was like to be a physician on a day-to-day basis. And I would say that was the moment when things started to turn for me. And then I started having other opportunities, or finding other opportunities, to get more of that clinical exposure.
It's excellent advice, and there's lots of opportunities at Purdue and other places. I encourage our listeners, take advantage, try things, see what fits you best, what you love, and go with that, because then life is pretty awesome when you're doing what you love every day.
Exactly. I got a question for you. How did you decide to specialize in hogs? Oh my gosh, it's so cool. It's so fascinating. I was terrified of hogs, so I grew up on a farm, and we had hogs, and we were always taught that the hogs were dangerous, and we needed to stay away from them as kids. And so it's funny because I know that's probably something that isn't pleasing for you to hear, but I was taught growing up to be afraid of hogs, and I just wonder how do you get into that area?
It was very random as well. I grew up in Baltimore, so I'm a city kid. I touched my first pig at the Baltimore Zoo when I was 21.
Oh.
So it was the first time I'd seen a pig, and they were labeled pigs, so we knew what they were. And I wanted to be a teacher, and I thought I'd specialize in surgery. I was going to be a dog surgeon because the only thing I liked in school was shop. I loved metal shop and wood shop, and I figured surgery was like shop. And came out here, and I didn't really like surgery, and I wasn't very good at surgery. And I was working to pay for school, and I worked for the swine group. And just doing clerical office work. And there was one day that they needed help at a hog farm, and they asked me to come out. And I just fell in love. As soon as I set foot on that farm, I knew this was what I was made for.
Wow.
You got the medicine, the herd health, the people, the engineering part, the ventilation, the management, the nutrition. It was all there. And the pigs are wonderful. They're just happy all the time.
Well, they say happy as a pig. Know, I love it. I love it. And I think, again, that's the lesson for folks out there is you just got to try different things because you never know. You may think you know what you want to do. And if that's the case and you actually end up doing it and loving it, well, good for you. But it's actually more often than not the rule rather than the exception that people go down a pathway that they weren't expecting, or that, they try something that they never thought they would like and then find out that, oh, that is something that I really love to do and could do for the rest of my life.
So I need to ask, I want to hear about the time when you got asked to be U.S. Surgeon General. What was that like, and how did you make that decision?
Well, so what was interesting is that I ran the Indiana State Department of Health prior to becoming United States Surgeon General. And so in that role, I worked for then Governor Mike Pence. Governor Mike Pence became Vice Presidential candidate Mike Pence, and then became Vice President Mike Pence. And so I suspected that I might be asked to at least talk to folks about a number of different roles. Didn't think it would be for Surgeon General of the United States, but was thinking that they might call me and ask me to do something. And Mike Pence called me up one day on the phone and said, "Hey, how are you doing? You may have heard that we won this election." He said, "And we'd love to talk to you about coming in and being part of the administration." And I said, "Okay, I'd love that." And I was actually in Arizona when I got the phone call. And he said, "Well, how's about tomorrow?" Because, and I said, "Well, I'm in Arizona. Does it have to be tomorrow?" He said, "Well, we're moving pretty quickly." So I said, "Okay, well, I'll do my best to make it work." So I was in Arizona for a conference, and frantically bought a plane ticket to fly out to New York City to go to Trump Tower and to meet with the president and his team the next day. So setting up all these travel arrangements, frantic, and the thing is, you're doing all that and you're also trying to think, okay, what am I actually going to say and do in this interview? While you're also trying to figure out how do I actually get to New York and navigate, in and out of the city. And it was the holiday season. It was the, November, December of that year, because the election had just occurred. And so I went into Trump Tower, and they had all the TV cameras rolling. And my mother-in-law calls me as I'm walking in the Trump Tower and says, "I see you on CNN." And she's calling me back from Indiana. And I go up and get off the elevator, and Newt Gingrich and his wife are standing there. It's all these people, these names who you just would never dream of being able to meet in person, or at least I hadn't as a small town kid. And I walked in and met with the president and had a conversation, and we talked about a couple of different positions. And I said, I really do think that at the end of the day, probably Surgeon General would be the position that's the best fit for me. And so that's how it went. And fast forward a couple of months after that, because the process went really quick and then it went really slowly. It was July when I finally got a call back. And this was, the initial meeting was in November, late November, early December. It was July when I got a call back saying, "Hey, we want to nominate you to be Surgeon General of the United States." And I was out of town again. I was actually in not Myrtle Beach, in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, on vacation. And I remember this because I was out with my family at a go-kart track in Gatlinburg, Tennessee.
Love go-karts.
And I get a call, and it says caller blocked. And so you always whether to pick those up or not. But I'd been kind of waiting, and I said, well, I better pick this one up. And so I'm at a go-kart track with all this noise going around. And I pick up the phone and it says, "Hello, is this Jerome Adams?" And I go, "Yes. Can you please hold to talk to the president?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay." But I'm frantically trying to find a quiet place to have a conversation. And so that's when I was offered the position of Surgeon General.
That's excellent. All right, let's go outside of work. I know that you like to race go-karts now. What other stuff do you do for fun? How do you manage stress?
Well, what's funny is I'm not a huge fan of go-karts so much as I'm a huge fan of spending time with my kids. So I have 3 kids. They are 17, 16, and 12. The 2 boys are 17 and 16, and the girl is 12. And at this point, I will do just about anything that they're willing to do with their dad. So whether that's going on go-kart rides with my boys, or playing golf with my older son who loves to golf. I'm a terrible golfer. Or playing soccer with my daughter. She's a soccer player. My middle son runs track. And one of the coolest pictures I have of him, he's actually a really good runner. And I actually ran track growing up. So I was a really good runner. When he was about 9 years old, he actually beat me in a 5K. And that's how good he was. Uh-huh. And so there's a picture of me and him running at the finish line. And I got to defend myself here. So I could have beat him, but I was running with him the whole time, trying to pace him. And I thought he was tired. And at the very end, with the finish line in sight, I turn my head and he takes off and he starts sprinting. He tricked me. And so I see him take off running and I'm like, oh gosh. And I take off running and someone snapped a picture of me and him sprinting towards the finish line. And he got across just before me, and he'll never let me live that down. But again, it's a special moment. And so I think that, to me, stress is about spending time with family and friends and finding ways to be around the people who you care about.
I love that. That's really good.
And I also love taking walks with my dogs. So again, we have a new one, Ruby, and Bella's little sister. And when I want to go out and relax, I love just being outside in the fresh air, and having the dogs with me. I think kind of give me something to. I love seeing them interact with the world, because they go out, and dogs are so cool. I mean, you can tell I'm a dog person, but they go out and everything's exciting to them. It's like, oh my gosh, a stick! Oh my gosh, a squirrel! Oh my gosh, what's this smell? And it's you're like, oh my gosh, if only my life was that simple.
We have to make it that simple, right?
We do.
Enjoy everything as if it's brand new. So before we wrap up, do you have an inspirational message for everybody listening?
Well, You know, I have a bit of advice, and then I'll finish with, I guess, an inspirational message. My advice is to love one another, to care about one another, to remember that people need to know that you care before they care what you know, and to travel as much as you can. And your travel can be to another country, but sometimes your travel can just be to another community. As we talked about earlier, even 10 miles away from me, it's a very different community with a very different life expectancy and a very different experience than what my kids have right here where they're growing up. So going and volunteering at a homeless clinic, or going, or a homeless shelter, or going and just seeing the world through someone else's eyes is incredibly important. Another one of my favorite quotes is by Mark Twain. He says, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness," because you're actually starting to see the world through other people's eyes, and it's no longer us and them. It's okay. This is what you're going through. But my I guess inspirational message to people would be: I grew up as a kid who was in a rural community, who didn't have many Black role models, to be honest with you, who didn't meet a Black physician until I was in college. I actually had good grades. I never dreamed I could be Surgeon General of the United States, never dreamed I could be a doctor, much less Surgeon General of the United States, simply because I just didn't know that was a possibility for me. And so what I would say to folks is, if I can make it from my background and surroundings to be Surgeon General of the United States, then there's really nothing that you can't do if you believe in yourself and believe that you can do it. And so don't let anyone tell you that you can't be anything that you want to be. Try to experience as many different professions and people as you can, because you never know what door might open or what thing you might like. You might want to be, a hog veterinarian one day, or you might be someone who thought you liked engineering or wanted to be an actuary initially, like I did, and end up being a doctor who becomes Surgeon General of the United States. So hopefully someone out there listening to this podcast will hear that, will remember that, and it will inspire them to try something new.
Outstanding advice and very inspirational. I'm sure you've inspired many with this podcast.
Well, you've been fantastic too. I tell you, I can. It's obvious that this is not your first rodeo. You could be on. You could be on one of these big networks one day, interviewing people too. You do a great job.
Oh, thank you very much.
The team effort, which is what we talked about, right?
Yeah, it's always the team.
One health.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, General Health.
Thank you.
You can learn more about other League of VetaHumanz superheroes at VetaHumanz.org. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and share it with your friends. And remember, use your powers for good.